Hey everyone, how's it going? Welcome back to another of my Terminal Directive card series, in which in each episode I feature a single Terminal Directive card. While we lack in breadth, we make up for in depth because further than any other pack review out there, we will analyze the card in both the theory and practical aspects. Today's card of the day is none other than Hunter Seeker! No, that's not the right slide. Oh man, this is why I can never use voice recognition software. Hunter Seeker. There we go. Okay, so this card has been spoiled since the dawn of time, and goodness me, everyone got riled up, excited, infuriated, any word you can think of. This is the card Wayland needed, or is it? After thinking about it for some time, I actually realized that there are lots of possible counters to this Hunter Seeker. Even though it provides a unique effect in universal trash, there are so many ways in which you can counter it. Just to give a quick rundown, it is dependent on the runner not having any recursion, any duplicate breakers, and not having any sacrificial constructs on the board. It depends on the runner stealing lots of agendas. If they go aggressive early, they can steal agendas before setting up their breaker suite, which means that you have no good targets to use Hunter Seeker on. During the mid game, they could possibly attain multiple agenda points in a single turn, either by a deep dig, a deep legwork, or deep data mining, or they could use fake agendas such as Mad Dash to increase their agenda points substantially, giving you very few opportunities to fire off a Hunter Seeker. Another option for runners is to completely ignore the notion of stealing agendas by playing cards such as Film Critic, which allow you to bypass stealing, or doing data leak reversal or milling based strategies, which again bypass the need to steal agendas completely, going for the alternative win condition of milling the co-op out instead. Finally, if that wasn't enough, this Hunter Seeker is vulnerable to bankruptcy as well. This is something I just realized. Being at 2 to play, and more importantly, being a double, if you are vamped down to 0 on the same turn your agenda is stolen, what happens is you cannot click for 2 credits and then play Hunter Seeker in the same turn. That requires 4 clicks, sorry. So yes, there are so many ways in which Hunter Seeker is vulnerable to being countered by the runner, and it being an operation that can only be played about you only have 2 or 3 windows to play this operation a game. If you're denied those windows, your deck is probably going to crumble apart. Now, we can't really discuss Hunter Seeker without bringing in the identity that was printed alongside Terminal Directive, and that is Scorpio's defense systems. But looking at the list of possible counters, Scorpio's really only protects against one of these counters, which is Breaker Recursion. Scorpio's does not protect against any of the rest. So I'm thinking, and I've said this since Hunter Seeker was released, that it is best played out of faction, because other factions have better cards to support it. Let me substantiate my claim. Let's look at this. What if I played Arc Lockdown and Chronos Project to guard against Breaker Recursion instead of using the Scorpio's ID? This will allow me to move to a different faction where I can play 15 minutes, an amazing agenda to force as many Hunter Seeker windows as possible. I can also play Harpsichord Studios the ID, which means that the runner cannot steal multiple agendas in a single turn to reduce the number of windows I have to use Hunter Seeker. Film Critic is a big counter to Hunter Seeker, and I'm sure many people are snotting it due to the fear of Hunter Seeker. Well, MCA Informant is conveniently in the yellow faction as well. And finally, Targeted Marketing helps against Vamp. So there you go. I've just built a bunch of support cards for Hunter Seeker. All I have to do is to smash them in the same deck, and this is what I'm left with. There are much fewer counters that I have to worry about, and this is probably a more coherent deck than most Scorpio's Hunter Seeker builds that you can come up with. Here's the deck. Aside from all these cards, you notice that I'm running basically a majority of my ice are hard gear checks. We have at least 3 of each barrier, sentry, code gate. Very conveniently, we have a sentry end the run, hard end the run in form of News Hound when Targeted Marketing is alive. So yeah, if I can pick just a single breaker type to shut down, I can then seal up multiple servers with the correct type of ice. But yeah, so for those of you who keep asking the question, hey, what's your deck building process? Any tips for building decks? Well, if you follow the systematic way I did, pick a card, find its weaknesses, and then tune your deck to cover as many of those weaknesses as possible, you get something like this. Now, is there a method to my madness, or is this just gonna fall flat on its face? There's only one way to find out. Let's run it through the gauntlet, shall we? Today we'll be busting the myth that all max decks are degenerate siphon decks. And as always, when busting myths, kids, do not try this at home under any circumstance. I am leaving HQ undefended. Do not ever attempt to do this. This is super dangerous and can easily lose you games. This is a very carefully controlled environment and we have all the safety procedures in check. I'm not getting siphoned. However, my opponent attacks HQ and they missed the 2 in 3 Chronos project. So the moment I saw Levy hit the bin along with a bunch of conspiracy breakers, I'm like, okay, this is my chance to shine. I'm playing Harpsichord for a reason. I'm going to make it count. I'm going to install double Chronos project that Max cannot steal. Well, they can only steal one. I'm going to score the other and say kiss goodbye to your Levy, your Paperclip, your Black Orchestra, your MK Ultra, and your medium, all in the trash right now. For a turn 3 Chronos Project score, this has to be one of the best hauls you can ever get. I mean, yeah, my opponent is suddenly limited on deck. Most max decks typically only have influence to run a single levy, and I've sniped off one of each breaker, so they can't even safely face check any of my eyes right now. Whereas if I did not score the Chronos Project there, my opponent could easily just run R&D. Poke it, face check it, probably forced to get the Black Orchestra out, but at least they can guarantee they'll break any ice since they're so rich. So yeah, being able to exile all the breakers is huge. Now the question is, how many backup breakers is my opponent running? You can be fairly sure that there should be at least 2 copies of each, and I'm quite wary of that. This is why I'm running Arc Lockdown in conjunction with Chronos Project. While both of my Chronos Projects have been used up, they're both in the score areas, I can still trigger Arc Lockdown, and a very surgical Arc Lockdown can lead to a complete lockout. I'm looking forward to doing that, and Max is milling their deck just for me, so I'm happy to have that. I get a buffet selection of Arc Lockdown targets. I just have to be really careful with it. Now against Conspiracy Breakers, one thing you have to be always constantly aware of is that sometimes, or rather most of the time rather, Resing Ice is actually not in your best interest. Okay, so I see the second Black Orchestra hit the bin and I'm like, okay, I'm going straight for the decoder. That's it. No more decoders for you. With both Black Orchestras in the bin, there's a very good chance that my opponent has no backup decoders remaining. And even if they do, what is it? If it's a York, we are not getting through Archangels. So yeah, I'm fairly certain my opponent's not running York anyway because they don't seem to be running any York support. They are not rebirthing into Null, they have no data suckers, and I don't see Cipher just yet. Alright, so my opponent has just rebirthed into Omar, so this necessitates icing up Archives, which is fine. I do drop a wraparound on Archives, which can be a problem because my opponent does have a Paperclip in the bin. So yeah, is it there? No, it's not there just yet, but it's gonna come soon. So right now, it's only Code Gates that are keeping my opponent out. I have an Archangel on R&D. I have an Enigma that's guarding my remote. This Enigma remote is gonna be huge. It's gonna secure whatever I jam in that remote for the rest of the game. And this is the main mode in which I'm gonna the main way I'm gonna win this game is to just completely secure this remote with a nice strong code gate. I draw into another code gate, my Enigma, and now I have to decide where to place it. The logical place here is HQ, because my opponent's on 30 credits and I'm on 11. I need to respect the one thing that can overturn me at this point in the game, a vamp. So with a code gate on HQ, a hard end run, I can completely eliminate that option. And now the Paperclip hits, so Archives is vulnerable. The other 3 servers are relatively safe. Each of them has a code gate. I'm going to put a wraparound on the server for remote just to make sure that my opponent doesn't perform any DDoS shenanigans. Because truth be told, I haven't seen too much my opponent's influence yet. I don't really know what they spend their influence on. It's probably something degenerate, so I need to be prepared for that possibility. Given that my opponent's running a lot of subpar cards like Brain Cage, Nerf Agent, Demo Run, you have to figure that their influence all was spent on something like either Rumor Mill, DDoS, or Faust, so I am going to be on the lookout for that. Archangel comes, I'm going to drop it on Archives, so that seals up all 4 servers with code gates. Now all I need to do is find an agenda. Right now I'm actually praying for Engender. I was actually quite miffed that I've been drawing nothing but Hunter Seekers all day. I don't really need any more Hunter Seekers, not when I have just completely blown through my opponent's rig. They seem to be digging for something because they just performed a making an entrance and dumped 6 cards into the bin, including a Temujin Contracts. That's crazy. Not sure what my opponent's looking for, but I know that I found what I exactly needed. An Astro Script to go in the remote. Gonna score that next turn. Barring some unforeseen code gate install. Rather, decoder install. I'm pensively awaiting this. This could end up being really bad for me if my opponent does find a decoder. All they have to do is to draw it, install it, run the remote, and I lose the Astro. The only consolation is that I do get a Hunter Seeker out. So we'll see what happens from there. So yeah, if I'm able to get my opponent's last decoder, if they are running any, I can Hunter Seek it and then find an Arc Lockdown to demolish their decoder options entirely. So that's the plan. You put them in a lose-lose situation where you either score the big agenda in the Astro, or if they steal the Astro, you get back at them by hunting seeking one of their breakers. In this case, I'm going to get the Astro score, and I'm going to ditch my duplicate Hunter Seeker. Pass the turn over. Let's see what my opponent does with 30 credits but no decoder. Oh. Wow. Okay. Game just got hard. This guy apparently runs 3 of each breaker. And now things are gonna get worse. A retrieval run's coming out. I'm gonna tax my opponent now since clearly the breakers are here to stay. Gonna tax the credits instead. The only consolation for me is that I have sniped my opponent's levy. Therefore, I'm not expecting my opponent to recur the entire deck, which means that they should have very limited economy remaining. So the Archangel should do good work against a Gordian Blade runner. Their credits are gonna drain very fast. They once had 30, they're now down to 12 after installing those big breakers. I also rest the wraparound just to tax them out just a bit more. And they get a medium and then spoon archives. There goes my Archangel. But at least my opponent had to go broke just to do this. I'm okay with it. Now the big question for me is, how do I target that Gordian Blade? Clearly, the best way to do this is to draw an Arc Lockdown, feed my opponent an agenda, then go Hunter Seek, Arc Lockdown the Gordian Blade. That should seal up the game. I'm also concerned, however, that my opponent has an alternate win con. Turntable. That is a very scary hardware. The worst console ever. Turntable can literally turn the tables. I have an Astro token here, and my next turn will very obviously be fast advancing the build that's in my hand. Unfortunately, that's not going to happen if my opponent steals it. If they are able to swap it with my Astro, I lose the Astro token and I don't get my 5 points, which is a huge deal. My opponent now goes for an Omar run, which I can't really defend against. That Temujin is going to give them big money, and the R&D run was pretty trivial. So they paid 1 for the wraparound but got 4 in return for accessing a card R&D, and this gives them just enough money to break the Archangel Trace. Had it not been for that Temujin run beforehand, I would have been able to bounce either a medium or a Gordian Blade back to their hand, which would have been huge. Instead, they get to see 2 cards, the second card of which is the worst agenda to ever hit. I really didn't want to see that. If my R&D held out right there, I would have been in such a good spot. But instead, now the tables have turned. The Astro token is now unusable unless I find a breaking news to use EOI on. That is still open for me, so I'm not completely out of this game yet. However, this puts my opponent in a very good position. They are threatening a massive dig on R&D with 3 fresh accesses next turn with the Omar run on archives. This is a big problem. The only way I can stop this is with a Hunter Seeker, but there's so many targets I need to hit down now. In addition to the Gordian Blade that I discussed earlier to lock my opponent's breaker options, I still have to worry about the medium, which is pretty loaded. I have to worry about Temujin, which is my opponent's only remaining source of economy. So yeah, there are lots of juicy targets. No single one of them is a right choice, but in the end I chose the Gordian Blade because I knew that if my opponent hit another agenda on the medium run, I would get another Hunter Seeker trigger. I would be able to then kill the medium and not have to worry about it for most of the rest of the game. Let's see. I'm going to use Jackson Howard here to shuffle 3 cards to lower the R&D agenda density. Most notably, I'm getting an Archangel back. If I can get an Archangel Fire here, that would be huge, being able to bounce something out there. Unfortunately, no dice, so things will go on as usual. I now flood my hand with project bills that I can't score now. Fast advance rather, because I've lost the Astro token. So the next best thing I can do is to jam it in the remote. My opponent doesn't seem to have the resources to recur the Guardian Blade, so I should be fine here. If they use same old thing, Retrieval Run, I think they will be stretched to find enough economy to contest the server. So instead, what they're going to do here is to Omar run R&D to see 3 fresh cards, not getting any agendas, but then run amok. What is this? Oh, didn't see that one coming. Okay, so how does this work? Whatever, right? They get to trash 1 piece of ice that I res during this run, at the end of the run. So I can keep that out with the Enigma, but they will simply lose a click and then jack out and force me to trash the Enigma, and I can't have that. I need the Enigma on my remote to just seal the deal towards late game. So I had no choice but to let him come through and concede the bill. This is very dangerous, putting my opponent on match point 5 points, but I felt that it was necessary because this gave me a Hunter Seeker trigger, and this should hopefully stem the bleeding of agendas that comes from the medium. Now my opponent played Deja Vu there to recur Guardian Blade, so that's not a very big concern because I'm going to Tama the Guardian Blade and then kill the medium with Hunter Seeker. So my opponent gains some, but they also lose some. They lose their R&D multi-access, and they still need to find the money to reinstall their Guardian Blade. That's not going to be easy for my opponent, and this should give me a bit of time, buy me just a bit of time I need to find some way to deal with my opponent. The problem is, I'm starting to realize that it's almost impossible for me to win at this point. For me to win, I need to trigger Hunter Seeker 1 more time. I need to bait my opponent into installing their Guardian Blade and then sniping it with Hunter Seeker. That's not going to happen, because once my opponent steals the next agenda, if it's worth 2 points, that's game. And I have a lot of 2-pointers in my hand, so this is looking very, very dangerous for me. Seeing that my opponent's on 1 credit, can I safely jam this build into the remote? I think I have to make a run for it at this point. I first click draw into an arc lockdown. I don't see any worthy targets, so I go for it. It's now or never. I need to score this build to put myself at threat of winning the game at the very least. Yeah, and can only hope that with only 1 credit, my opponent can't do much to contest the server. Sure, they'll get an Omar run. Sure, I'll have to concede an R&D access, but if they don't hit an agenda here, I might be good. What can they do? Install Guardian Blade? They won't have enough money to get past my server 4. But nope, same old random mock. Nope, just a random mock straight up from hand, so I couldn't even rest the Enigma to lose a click. I mean, I did in the end, but my opponent ended up being able to get through to steal the build. Now, I could have prevented my opponent from stealing this build by resing the wraparound before that. My opponent would be 1 credit short of getting through, but I let my opponent have it anyway. I did not see the point in dragging out the game because even if I had scored that build, I would be in an almost certainly losing position anyway. With the build in my score area, my opponent now has a 2-point agenda to turntable, which means that next steal will win the game. This implies that I will not have the chance to use Hunter Seeker 1 more time, which I needed to completely lock my opponent's Breaker Suite out. Not to mention, scoring that build came at the cost of tearing down my secure scoring remote, so yeah, there was no way I was gonna pull it out. With turntable, rebirth Omar, and run amok. I can't believe I'm saying this, but yes, run amok. My opponent just had too many ways to threaten my servers despite being arc locked down and Hunter Seeked to hell. Unfortunately, the story is only gonna go worse from here because this was actually the 3rd game I had with this deck. The previous 2 games end up a lot worse for me. None of them ended up even being close. If you thought Max was an anomalously difficult matchup, I'm sorry to say, but I've seen Shapers that have Sacrificial Construct, clone chips, in addition to their signature levy, just to make my life a living nightmare. Not to mention denying my win condition of fast advancing breaking users to win. Yep, they run Clot too. How am I supposed to deal with all of that? So yeah, there are many decks out there nowadays that are super robust to Hunter Seeker. If there's one conclusion I've drawn from playing this deck a couple of times, it's that one should not lean on Hunter Seeker as your main win condition. It's a very nice side thing to have, maybe a surprise one-off in your deck if you're out of faction, but you really shouldn't be all in on it because there are a good number of decks out there that just spit in Hunter Seeker's face. I've also been forced to eat my words. I've definitely underrated Scorpios' ability, and I think it is a lot more necessary in Hunter Seeker decks than I initially gave it credit for. Even though in the early slide I mentioned that it only protects against one counter from the runner side, that is program recursion, this actually turns out to be a very, very important thing to counter, because not only can you counter program recursion, you can even counter program recursion at instant speed. And that's actually quite important against matchups which run cards like Clone Chip. There's no way you're going to burn through 3 Clone Chips, which is the typical number that Shapers run, without Scorpios' ability. And Shaper is like a big faction in itself. So yeah, I think it's very important to have that Scorpios ability constantly, just to be able to threaten a solid Hunter Seeker and make every Hunter Seeker count. Like in this game, for example, if I had Scorpios' ability, Golden Blade wouldn't have been a problem. My opponent would not have been able to re-tutor it with Deja Vu, for example. So this is actually quite a big deal. Having one less moving part to worry about, yeah. Not having to time your arc lockdown perfectly or score a Chronos project at just the right time. So yeah, even though I was very unsuccessful with this deck, and it's definitely not going to be even a tier 3 or tier 4 deck, I'm happy to say that at least I've learned something from it. And through these games of piloting Hunter Seeker, I'm now better able to understand its limitations, having experienced them myself firsthand. In the process of experimenting with cards, I'd much rather fail to be afraid by making bold predictions and then realizing that I'm wrong, rather than to be afraid to fail. Sticking to tried and tested strategies and not exploring out of my comfort shell. I hope you've benefited from this video as much as I have. In the meantime, as always, thanks for watching, happy net running, I'll see you next time.